Hello, good afternoon everyone, and good morning to you if you're joining us from the other side of the Atlantic. My name is Alistair Wheat, and I'm going to be taking you through our session today on horizon scanning, listening beyond the brand. By the way, just asterisk brand here, just to say from the very beginning, that when I talk about brands, I'm also referring to potentially government departments or charities or organisations. So if you hear me talking about brands and you're a charity, just hopefully you can make that apply to yourself as you go through this. So there's a little bit about me. So I'm the lead consultant here at Gorkana for Social Media Insights. Just to contact me, be glad to connect with you afterwards or hear any feedback, good or bad, that you have afterwards. By all means, feel free to post questions throughout the course of the webinar. We'll have some time at the end to answer those, and you can get questions either through the question panel on the webinar interface, or you can also tweet them to us using the hashtag GorkanaSocial. Or it will just go straight to Gorkana. I'll be around afterwards as well, so if we don't have time to get to all the questions, I'll be available on Twitter later or an email to pick up questions that you've got. So this is the second in a three-part series. The first part we looked at was on understanding context and sentiment, which we did a couple of weeks ago. And by the way, if you missed that session or you want to hear it again, then that's actually available on YouTube. Just look for our YouTube channel, search for Gorkana, and you'll find us there. Today we're going to be looking at horizon scanning, listening beyond the brand. And then part 3 in July, we'll be looking at social media influence. And I've put influence in quotes there because it's often a very misused and misunderstood term, and we'll be looking then at what different people mean when they talk about influence, whether we're maybe talking about authorities or connectors or brand advocates, etc. So we'll try and cover a lot of different things that people often talk to about influence when we get to July. But there's a lot to cover, so if there are things that you feel you want us to look at in more detail that we either gloss over in the sessions that we're doing or we've missed entirely, please get in touch with us. You can email us at events@gorkana.com if you have feedback, or again you can contact us via Twitter, and we may well extend the series if there's a demand for specific subjects that we haven't covered already. So just to say about horizon scanning, we're not talking here about trying to predict the future. So these are actually drawings from France in the 1900s when they tried to vision what the future might look like, and they did get some things quite good, but as you can see, there's a few things that were a little bit way off base. Whale-powered buses, which is an interesting idea, but don't think we'll see that anytime soon, probably because there aren't any whales left. But horizon scanning is much more of a medium-term activity, so the sort of thing that these meerkats are up to, just looking out to the horizon, trying to see potential risks coming along and trying to spot either dangers that may be coming in or other things that they need to react to. And as with these meerkats, sometimes the more eyes that you've got looking out for potential risks, the better. But we're also going to be looking at horizon scanning like this hawk here, looking out for opportunities, trying to see maybe slight movements that signal there's a nice juicy rabbit in the bush ready to be pounced upon. But with both the risk and the opportunities, the key thing is to be quite nimble as an organization to actually be able to take the information and do something with it. So I'm not going to be going into detail about the sort of internal communication structures or the internal processes that are needed to make the most of these processes. I'm mainly going to be focusing on what actually we need to do to get the right information in and to be able to see whether something's actually breaking or not. I will touch a bit on that, but I'm not an internal comms or a PR specialist. I'm here as a social media analyst. But before we go any further, I do just want to put a question to the audience. So this will appear on your screen. Is that great? So this is a question here. So do you monitor social media for terms other than just your brand? So starting to get some results coming in. Okay, right, we're halfway there now. There. Okay, results are almost fully in, but about 3/4 of you are saying yes, you do monitor social media for more than just your own brand mentions, and then another 1/4 of you say that you don't, you just use social media to monitor for mentions of brands. So actually, perhaps it's because we've got an informed audience here, but I was actually expecting a slightly lower percentage on the yes and a bit more on the no, but it's encouraging to see that there. So I'm just going to pause that to follow that most people voted. Thank you very much. So just to move on then. So as I said, we're going to cover horizon scanning both as a form of early warning, but also to identify opportunities. And then how? Well, we're going to look at how to track based upon themes or subjects. So there are some particular challenges when it comes to search for non-brand mentions. We're also going to look at how to monitor for trends, either based on historical analysis or new things that are emerging. And then also how to track influencers and to look out for experts and connectors to help you see what's going on. So starting at the top, the key with most of things in social, actually pretty much everything in social, when it comes to monitoring and analysis, is to get the right content in. So we're going to look now at how to actually do topic-based searches. So there's different types of searches. First of all, you may be lucky in that the thing that you need to search for is actually a strong term. It's a very specific thing that you need to look for. For example, it could be cybersecurity. So you may want to be looking at cybersecurity. You may be a cybersecurity firm, or you are a business consultancy, or you do risk management, or it could be any number of reasons, and you want to track what people are saying about cybersecurity, and you can pretty much stick in the word cybersecurity. You may want to add other terms like cyber espionage or cyber spying, hacking. You may want to add a lot of other terms around it, but if you just went in and did cybersecurity on its own, you'd be quite safe. I could give other examples, but you get the idea. It's a very specific term. Otherwise, if you've got a term that's maybe not too strong, or it's a term that you don't want everything, you just want something specific, then you maybe need to add some context. So here, we looked a bit at this, the mobile phone sector in the first webinar, but here we're looking at the term 3G or 4G, but you might not want everything about 3G or 4G. You might not want people posting about deals or which phones have got it, or government regulations to do with the bandwidth, etc. You may just want to look at people actually talking about the quality of the signal that they've got and whether they see maybe an improvement going from 3G to 4G, or whether they feel like they've wasted their money in getting a 4G contract and there's no difference. So you may need to add additional words in there to get context. The near/12, this is a search operator, so this is looking for proximity here, saying that it's got to have the terms on the left, 3G or 4G, within 12 words of the terms on the right. I've picked 12 here because 12 is the average number of words in a sentence. You can do more or less. Sometimes it's worth experimenting when you get the results in. Remember, with the horizon scanning, you don't necessarily need to get every single mention. It's not like brand monitoring that you need to get everything in. You want to just maybe get enough to give you a good flavor without getting a lot of junk in that may kind of cloud the results. Also, I mentioned in the first talk that we partner with Brandwatch. So Brandwatch provides the technology infrastructure that we use in our social media search, and they've got a lot of really good search operators, more than most, or definitely more than any other social media tools that I've seen. Some of the tools that maybe people on the call are using may just have and or not. For Twitter, that's not going to make much difference, but especially if you're looking at longer form content like forums, blogs, or news items, the and can mean, especially on a long article, you can get the word you want at the top and then the context term right at the bottom, so it doesn't really help you. So if you've got the ability to make use of proximity searches, then it's definitely going to help you doing this sort of activity. The other thing to say is that you might have weak terms with other weak terms. We do brand monitoring for the Mexican government, and we track all sorts of things that people say about Mexico in a number of different markets in, I think, 8 languages at the moment. And we do, amongst other things, we look for conversations about Mexico's relations with other countries in North America. So what we've got here is the asterisk, by the way, here just means it's like a wild operator. So it can be Mexico or Mexican, and it's got to be near 15 words to Canada or US or USA or North America. But then that's also got to be near the words relationship or leaders or meetings or collaboration, etc., cooperation or collaborators, cooperates. So that's why I've used the wildcard there. So you've kind of got 3 different sets of quite weak terms, but when you put them together, you actually get something that's quite relevant. And that might apply to you. So if you're looking at something that's talked about a lot, it could be, you might be looking at cancer, but it's near to treatment or it's near to medication, and then that's also got to be near to awareness or fundraising. And so you might want to have, a combination of 3 different sets. But the important thing is to try and think of your terms in terms of subsets, and that each subset needs to be about something specific. So here we've got my main keyword here, but then my second set is to do with countries, to do with the region, and then the third set is to do with the type of activity. So try and think of it in those terms. The fourth way to get content in that's relevant is you can have actually quite weak terms, but provided they're linked to authors that are relevant, you're going to get good content. So most of, I think, people on the call use Squalcon for the database that we provide. So you'll be familiar with the fact you can use our service to search for journalists or bloggers based on a whole number of subject areas, and you can use that to pull out authors. If you're not using it, you may be, I know there's quite a lot of agencies on the call, you've probably got your own list of all sorts, and you've probably built up lists of Twitter profiles for those people, or you may just, if you're not an agency or you're not working with us, I'm sure if you actually looked across your office, there's lots of individuals who probably follow various people on Twitter, and maybe using TweetDeck or other free tools. If you actually kind of combine all the people that you're following collectively to make a list, it's probably going to be quite a relevant pool of people who are posting relevant content. So if you combine that together, you can do this sort of thing. So what I've got here is a list of several hundred journalists or bloggers who cover fashion and beauty. And I've simply just done a search for the word shoes. So I definitely don't want to search for the word shoes across all social media channels because I've got a lot of junk. And I don't really know much about shoes anyway. But if I look at these results, you can see that they're all quite relevant. So we've got this number 2 here, this Francesca Stone, one from the blog last week, and she's used a lot of hashtags, but she's got shoes in there, and she's got then a link to an Instagram post. And so she's obviously done a blog and talked about a number of things and then marked out that she's mentioned shoes. The third one here is interesting. I used the word shoes with a shoe with an asterisk at the end, so it gives it shoes. I was thinking of shoe and shoes. I wasn't thinking of shoe fetish, but there we go. That's what's come back in. And so she's asking for emails if you know someone who's, or you have got a foot fetish or a shoe fetish. Retweet for your colleagues to see, or maybe not. And then we've got a few other ones that are relevant. But again, because this is quite a targeted, specific group of individuals who talk about fashion and you hope that they can be up to speed with the latest trends, I can be very lazy in my search. So looking for the word shoes here. We do a number of horizon scannings for clients, some are very big topics. We also do horizon scanning for DEFRA, which is the British government's Department for Food, Agriculture and Rural Affairs, and the Environment, sorry I missed out the E there. And so they track a whole variety of subjects, so some of which I can't mention, but this is one that's not particularly sensitive, plastic carrier bag charges. So not particularly exciting, but it is getting discussed. So as you can see, that this is the sort of subject which is not having a large amount of ongoing discussion, but then you have a few spikes. So you kind of think, well, what's driving those spikes? So we can then look at news. This is me filtering to news only. And so when you look at news, we can see that there's a couple of correlations here. So there's 2 spikes there that correlate with where I had my spikes. So looking at the one in the middle, that was a story about the plan for the British government to introduce charterless bags, and then the one in the end is about the Queen's speech coming. But then there's 2 ones in the middle where there's no correlation. So there was a spike in social on those days, but there was no story in mainstream. So you may or you may not see a correlation in spikes from mainstream to social, although all of these spikes are driven off the back of something that happened in the mainstream press, but it may have just been one single story that got people chatting. We've also got this spike in the news, which is equivalent to one of the other ones that generated a spike in social, but this one here, just the 23rd of April, I think it is, didn't generate a corresponding jump in social media discussions. So what's happening there? Well, here's the one on the 6th of February, and you can see this one article alone on the BBC site got over 1,000 comments on it. So people seem to be getting quite upset about the fact that the government's going to introduce charges to plastic bags, and they're a bit annoyed about how the whole policy has been done. And here's another piece of video content. The BBC seem to cover it more than others. We do have more than one news outlet in the UK, in case you're listening from overseas. But there just seems to be quite a few articles on here, and they're all linked to each other. Whereas on the 28th of May, we saw another spike. So this wasn't a big spike in the mainstream news, but it was a spike in social. So the Scottish Parliament have said that they're going to do plastic bags. So it wasn't covered as much in the mainstream news, but talked about just as much in social. And you can see actually on the Scottish government's announcements, there was a lot of positive sentiment towards it. By the way, I did talk quite a bit about sentiments in the previous webinar, so I'm not going to go into detail about how I do that now, but feel free to look at the YouTube, listen to the YouTube video if you want to know more about sentiment analysis. And you see this sort of post here. So this guy saying, I agree with this. It saves the environment and money for charities. Win-win. Scottish Parliament backs the plastic bag charge. So he thinks it's great. And most people seem to think that was a good idea. But when the Westminster government suggested the exact same thing in the Queen's speech, which is where the British government outlines their plans for the year, it was overwhelmingly negative. And he had this sort of comment. The government runs out of ideas of new tax on plastic bags. So it's kind of interesting to see that it's the exact same story, really, but different governments, and very different reaction in social media. So what do DEFRA learn by this? Well, they learn that plastic bags are generally not a subject that's discussed a lot in social, but when there is a story, it often prompts people then to air their opinion about it, and people can have quite strong opinions, believe it or not. And also that while the policy is popular in Scotland, it isn't the same in England. And I think one of the key things here is that actually DEFRA have got a very smart internal system whereby they have people who look at a variety of different subjects, but then they act as a layer that then filters that before it goes more widely into the other parts of the organisation. So if something does spike and they do think that it's something that's going to pick up with media interest, or there's a particular group of stakeholders who really have clearly voiced an opinion about something, they will then use the social media tracking service that we provide to provide briefings through to senior civil servants and ministers. So it's important to be able to look at different subjects. So there are other subjects that we track there which are much, much more discussed, but each subject on its own has a spike that may be relative to that subject and still be worth paying attention to. I'm also going to look now at, sort of in terms of identifying opportunities, trying to identify when conversations actually happen. I'm going to try to offer some advice that's more useful than this that I saw, I think it was over a year ago. I'm not going to mention who it was, but this was a competitor who did some social media analysis, and their findings were that tweets during the day are the way to go, so that the best time to tweet is when people are awake, which is very, very helpful. If you were tweeting in the middle of the night and wondering why nobody's replying, then now you know what's going wrong. So that's not, hopefully, what I'm going to hopefully give something more useful than that now, but it's very easy to get carried away with these sort of things. I see lots of this sort of thing out there looking at when to tweet, but it can be more nuanced, and also time zones in social media don't mean anything unless you actually say timings don't mean anything unless you say which time zone you're in. So it's 8 AM to 7 PM here. I don't know whether that's London or New York or San Francisco. And as I'll show you now, it can make a big difference as to where in the world we are. So what I'm looking at here, those of you in the last call remember that we touched upon big data towards the end, looking at what does the spike look like in big data. What I've done here is I've actually looked at the big data discussions. Again, it's quite a strong search term. You can search for the word big data. And I've looked at discussions about big data over the last 6 months and done an hour-by-hour breakdown, so I can see what time of the day do people talk about big data. And you can clearly see a bulge here towards the afternoon. This is GMT time I've got along the bottom. But that is, if you think about the States, that's really kind of from 8 AM to 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the eastern coast. So I think what's interesting here is that you can see that the peak time, this may seem obvious perhaps, but if you are talking about a subject that's got interest on both sides of the Atlantic, if you're posting in the UK, you absolutely want to be focusing your efforts in the afternoon, because that's when most people on both sides of the Atlantic are going to be paying attention to it, and that's where you've got the most opportunity for content to go viral, for content to get picked up within the core group of people that you're engaging with. You can see the morning time for the UK and for Europe, it kind of gradually picks up, but it's pretty low all the way through the morning. And also the interesting thing here, perhaps, is if you flip it around, if you're posting about big data in the States, then you want to be doing it in the morning, because then you've got actually lots of people who've already been awake for a while in Europe who maybe want to take part in the conversation as well. There's also this little kind of blip here at the end there, sort of around about midnight GMT time, which is 4 o'clock in the afternoon in California, but you can really see this is really a B2B discussion. If we look at other subject areas, you see a much bigger volume in the afternoon for the US, whereas we see with big data, the guys in the States have really stopped talking about this once work's over. And even for, once you get past 4 o'clock in the afternoon in California time, it's pretty much dead time in terms of the overall trend. But that's not to say that those people talking about it, in the lower periods shouldn't be engaged with them. I'm saying if you want to focus your efforts and really go for the best return, go for the times when people are talking about it. And this is just looking at one subject area, but by all means try to get an understanding of what your subject area looks like. Are you just looking at getting an impact in your own market, or are you trying to get an impact within your language? So if you're looking at English language and it's a subject that's of interest in the States, then definitely look at either posting in the afternoon if you're here in Europe, or posting in the morning if you're in the States. And here's big data in social. This is looking at the overall weekly volumes for people talking about big data over the last year. So you can see we've got about 40,000 posts going up to about 60,000 posts with a few spikes there. Now, for those of you on the call who may be from a web analytics background or a just a general sort of marketing analytics background, you may be thinking, oh yeah, well I can kind of get this stuff from web search. And there's two things I want to say about that. First of all, is that you can. So just pay attention to this chart here. We've got this dip in sort of around the Christmas period. So big data is again very much a B2B topic. So when people are on holiday, they don't tend to be talking about it. It's just something they do during their work time. And here is Google search trends. So this is looking at people searching for big data as a phrase. And again, you've got that very clear dip around about the Christmas period. So what you can see here is that because big data is quite a specific term, and it's quite easy to search for, and people will use it as a search in social and in Google, you get a very strong correlation. People talk about it, everyone knows what it's about, or they think they do. But this correlation doesn't always happen with other subjects. And even with this, if we go back to this one, there's this spike here, which didn't really feature much in the search. There wasn't a spike there. And what was triggering that? Well, there was actually quite a bit of discussion in the States about American farmers being really unhappy about how big data is being used by agricultural firms and pharmaceuticals to analyze what they're up to. And they didn't like that, so there's a bit of a protest, and there's quite a lot of news outlets covering that. So I think typically what you'll see is that if a story hits the mainstream news, and it just generally captures public interest, people read about it, but they don't necessarily go and search about it. They'll share it, they'll talk about it, but they won't search. So that's why we've got a spike there. This is the biggest spike we had in big data. When it was talked about the most throughout the course of the last year, it coincided with, and this wasn't the only thing happening at the time, but it was clearly one of the big stories that generated that spike overall. Now, cybersecurity, here's another one. This is looking at the last 90 days. When you switch the Google Trends to look at 90 days, you actually get a breakdown day by day, so you can clearly see the weekly fluctuation. B2B topic, again, not very much discussed when people are not at work. But if I overlay that against social, you see a much bigger variation. For a start, on the left, we've got this, we see that the weekend dip seemed to disappear. That's because there was just a lot of discussions about various different hacking stories that just kept people interested in talking about cybersecurity throughout the whole week. And we've got this massive spike here on the 22nd of May, I think it was, 20th of May, and it was this story about the US indicting Chinese officials over cyber spying. So that was talked about a lot, as you can see from that spike. And again, this is something that we see in social, is that we can also track a more complicated terminology around, rather than just the word cybersecurity. We can look for other words related to cybersecurity, which without having that specific term. And with Google search trends, you're a little bit limited in terms of picking search terms. People will, when they're talking and posting about something, they'll use a wider variety of terms, and won't necessarily know how to apply those terms when it comes to search. And Bitcoin, here we go. This is a very topical thing at the moment. Actually, just down the road from us, there's a shopper. We're near Old Street Roundabout. We call it Silicon Roundabout, which is maybe a little bit lame for those of you who may be calling from Silicon Valley. All we can come up with is a roundabout. And what we've got there is a shop that now has you can actually buy your noodle soup with Bitcoins. Very novel, very Shoreditch. But this is just a tracking of Bitcoin mentions in the UK. It's a bit difficult to see really what's going on there. There's lots of chatter. These are the sort of posts you get. It's a little bit confusing to see any kind of trends and to see what's going on. But if you limit it to tracking journalists, then you get a much cleaner view, a much more interesting view of what goes on. So these are all mainly financial journalists talking about Bitcoin, a whole variety of different things. And actually, they're mentioning that Income Soup, that's the one in Old Street, where they've got the ATM's actually now broken. So if we limit the tracking to just the authors, you get a much more interesting view, which can hopefully give you an indication as to where, if you're talking about Bitcoin as well, you may want to get involved in the conversation. We track something like, we have our own internal tracker where we track about 3,500 journalists on Twitter. We can see all sorts of things that we talk about. So if we filter that down to Bitcoin, this is what it looks like. So some days they don't say anything at all, but then we've actually got a bit of a spike here on the 20th of April, so May the 13th, where we had a number of different stories talking about a new hedge fund going to be looking at Bitcoins, and then also discussions about the Bitcoin share price, the Bitcoin price dropping, and that leading to a drop-off in the number of journalists talking about it. So if you've got something interesting to say about Bitcoin, perhaps, then you may want to focus on this as a tracker to see where there are other interesting stories, and also to see who's talking about it, because then you've potentially got the ability to get involved in it. So just to kind of wrap up a bit, looking at risk monitoring first of all, the kind of key takeaways. First of all, is that it is hard to predict the future. You're not expecting to kind of get several days heads up that there's a problem coming. This is much more about getting maybe a few hours heads up, potentially, if there's something that's about to hit the mainstream. Because if the story is big and social, it will hit the mainstream. Journalists are always looking at social to help them see where a story is popular, and often that will be their cue to go and write about it. And if you are tracking journalists that way, you can actually use alerts to say, right, if I have a journalist saying certain things, then maybe I want to get an alert going through to my comms team to let them know that there's potential that there's a story coming through. Quite often what we see is journalists will use Twitter as a means of crowdsourcing information, of getting ideas for what they should write about, or validating facts. So you can sometimes see in the discussions about a story before it actually comes out in the mainstream press. It's also important to look out for the overall spikes. So there may be something that's just big in popular culture. That itself may then also capture the attention of journalists if it's mainstream media that you're worried about. And there are, within our system, you can also get alerts just to give you a warning when there's a percentage increase in the overall results. The other thing to say is that not to get blinded by retweets. Retweets are quite lazy. Sometimes you'll see a spike when it's just very something funny or quirky, and people just press the retweet button. The retweet button doesn't really necessarily tell you a whole lot. It's much better to actually look for unique content from unique authors. So to see if there's a real spike, if there's a real trend going on, what you need to do is look out for lots of different types of people saying something that is unique. So you may get one person who just says a lot, keeps tweeting the same thing, just on a bit of a rant and a bit of admission, and that can also cause a spike. So unique content from unique authors is the best way to see a wider trend. And also use your understanding of historical data to guide your reaction to what's happening on a given day. So if, for example, you see that like we saw with the plastic bags, you know that when a news story comes out there's going to be a spike that's just going to happen anyway, and you know what that spike typically looks like. You'll be able to then see, well, if all of a sudden we get like triple or 10 times that amount, then something really serious is happening, and we can't just think this is just, oh yeah, there's people chatting on Twitter. Having an understanding of what spikes look like historically means that when a crisis really does hit, you'll be able to make some kind of judgment about how big a crisis it really is. The other thing to talk about is sentiment. So sometimes you may get a spike, but it generally can be quite neutral. It's just people sharing information, sharing stories. That again may not be something to be really concerned about. And it's also important to use your general data to understand and identify potential hostiles, because there's some people who are just angry all the time. There's some people who are angry just about a specific subject. So if your business suddenly gets sucked into discussion, so it could be, I don't know, GM foods, for example, and there's just a lot of people very angry about GM foods, and for some reason, maybe you're not an agricultural business, but you get associated with GM foods as a brand, and you think, well, hold on, everyone's saying this negative stuff about it. Well, actually, it's just the GM foods subject. It's a very hot issue. People are very passionate about it, so it isn't necessarily that you've got a major problem as a brand. It's just you've been sucked into a very contentious issue. So again, that wider understanding of sentiment will help you know how you need to react to that. And this may be a little bit of a cliche, but take a joined-up approach and don't overreact. Sometimes what happens, and I've seen it many times with a company who's maybe not too familiar with social media, don't have a huge profile themselves, and all of a sudden there's a spike in mentions about them, and there's a bit of panic. Oh wow, we normally get maybe 500 mentions a day or something like that, or even less than that, and then we've got a few thousand posts, and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, that's a crisis. Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It might be the case that, again, you've just been associated with a wider topic, and actually in the grand scheme of things, nobody really cares that much about the fact that you've been mentioned in it. And actually by overreacting to it, you can actually create a story where one didn't exist, and that can again get sort of media coverage and just create a vicious cycle. So make sure that you include your social media teams and your comms teams in terms of understanding how to react, but try and keep a sense of perspective on the whole thing. Looking then at how to identify opportunities. You're looking out for spikes here, so you may be able to comment, like I talked about cybersecurity before. So if you feel as if you've got something really interesting and unusual, quirky, insightful, provocative, funny to say about cybersecurity, and you're thinking, well, we could just put it out there now, but we also want to look when there's actually a lot of attention on the subject. You've got to look out for spike, but make sure that it's appropriate. You can actually get involved with your content. Sometimes it's best to stay quiet, even though the subject is very relevant. just because there may be people involved in leading the conversation who may be hostile to you as a business or just generally don't like corporates getting involved in that sort of thing. Really look for relevancy to your expertise and messaging. So whilst you have the overall picture, you want to look for the opportunity to comment. So again, the cybersecurity thing, it could be that there's something to do with businesses, and actually, your focus is on businesses and what they can do to protect rather than governments. That may be your chance to get involved. Know your inventory. Lots of brands produce lots of content, and it sometimes goes out once, and you have one shot and it gets forgotten about. With social media, it's okay to try and reuse old content. I'll show you an example in a moment, but have content and be ready to tailor it. So you may have a press release or an infographic or some data, and then you can just reuse that when the time comes around again to bring it up to the front. We looked at this guy in the last session, Bernard Marr. He's a big data expert, and he put a slideshow up talking about what is big data, and he published it at the end of February. And this is his first tweet about it, so he tweeted about it, and he got 12 retweets. And then he had another go later on, 18 retweets. He did a few other tweets about getting similar numbers, sort of sometimes maybe 40. But then he carried on doing it. And then this happened. He did a tweet. This is the one we looked at last time. He just said, "What is big data?" And he linked to a slideshow. And look, that got 1,000 retweets. Now, I don't really know exactly. Maybe if I spent a detailed look at this, I could figure out why. But there's a massive difference. So he had about sort of 5 tweets about this exact same link, almost saying exactly the same thing. And didn't get a huge uptake. But for some reason, when he did it on this day, boom, he got a massive increase. And this particular slide share has been seen over 125,000 times, which is a lot for slide share. So if you've had a go at putting content out and didn't get the kind of response that you wanted, it could just be that the timing wasn't right. So if you have the right listing in place and the subject comes around again, people are talking about it, be ready to get your content out there and see if it gets more luck the next time around like this guy did. Also to say, know your people. There may be an opportunity to get comments or to get exposure, but it might not be appropriate for you to tweet or to post as the brand. You may have subject experts, which is also why it's important to make sure that you nurture the social media profiles of the people in your business so that they have got some connections, they've got some profile, they're not suddenly just tweeting out of the blue. But it might be that you in the comms function or whoever it is that's actually responsible for this horizon scanning, you see that there's a trend, there's a sort of interest in the subject. You might want to go in and give a nudge to your subject matter expert and say, hey, that slideshow that you did, why don't you tweet about it now? Use this hashtag. Maybe there's an event going on, or it's just now's the opportune time, because it's actually quite popular at the moment. So know who in the organization is qualified to maybe then take questions on that subject as well. I'm going to cover this more in the next session, but I just want to mention that it's important to build relationships with key influencers so that when the time comes, they know you and they know to expect that you've actually got expertise on a particular subject. But I'm not going to go into detail on this. This is only just a kind of tip for the next session. So just want to say, go and look for those rabbits out there. Hopefully nice and cute like him. So like I said, the next session is coming on July the 2nd. That's it for today in horizon scanning. Happy to take questions. I've got this one here. Going to have a look at questions. Okay, we've got a few here. Right. Okay, first question, is the Near 15 just for Brandwatch or available on other social listening tools? So most of the tools I've seen don't have proximity search. They tend to just have and or not. There are some other ones that do have proximity search. I don't know if they write it in the Near 15 terms though. I'm trying to think of anyone specifically that have that. Most of the big ones that I come across don't have the proximity search, but there are a few coming out there. I can, if you just want to either just tweet that to me, I can go away and have a look. I do know of a few. The other question is, where can we actually search for these? Is there a specific website that includes searches for social mentions and not the mentions program? So I think that's talking about which sort of channels to search for. What I was searching for is searching for content across all the social media channels. Quite often you'll see that Twitter is the main one. But again, often what Twitter is, it's actually pointing you to content that sits elsewhere. So what you see in Twitter is people sharing links. So you'll either pick up mentions of blogs through searching blogs direct themselves, or you may pick up blog content by searching what people are sharing about them. But I think there is a lot of depending on the subject area, there's a lot of sharing going on in Facebook, but unfortunately most of that is private. We can only access the public available content on Facebook, and that really is just the tip of the iceberg. The other thing to say is also like LinkedIn and B2B stuff, it's a really good place for sharing links, but unfortunately LinkedIn don't make that content searchable externally. So I think if I didn't get that question right, feel free just to post a clarification on that one. And just to see, you mentioned alerts based on velocity and percentage increase in average mentions. Is there an alert metric you would recommend? Yeah, so the way that works in our system is that actually it looks at the volumes that are typical for a certain time of the day. So if, for example, there is a certain level of volume in the mornings, let's say you know that at a certain time of day you can get 100 posts on a particular subject, what you're able to do with our system is to set a percentage increase, so you could maybe 30, 40, 50%. I think it really depends on the level of variation and how frequently you get those alerts. You may want to even put it at 100 or 200% to really get an idea of something kicking off. But what it does is it looks for a percentage increase that's typical for that time of day, and it does it on hourly intervals. Just want to see if there are other ones just to come through here. So how do you differentiate between strong search terms, medium ones, and weak ones? Okay, so yeah, I'll just see if I can maybe go back to that slide. This one here. So just to kind of maybe repeat these, just to give a little recap. So what I'm saying about the strong term, the top one here is, so cybersecurity, I'm saying that that's a strong term. You know, there's nothing else that it could mean. So whereas if I'm looking for you know, the one at the bottom, the weaker terms, if it's like Mexico or North America, those could be all sorts of things. So I need to have some context to that. And weak terms, again, so the middle ones, 3G or 4G, they are quite specific, but in terms of what I want, they're not strong enough, because I want to get people talking about the quality of the signal rather than just people mentioning 3G or 4G. So that's why I need to add additional terms to get me what I want. So you may actually have quite good search terms that the content's relevant. It's the right subject matter, but it doesn't give you the specific information that you need. So you may want to then add additional clarification. I would also suggest that with, well, I mean, different tools do structure data in different ways. The way that it works for us is that we have a query, which is your main pot of data, but then you've got the ability to create rules. So sometimes, depending on the subscription that you've got, if you've got a healthy data allocation, sometimes what I'll do is to say, make sure that the actual query is broad, that you maybe get some stuff in the query that you don't want, but that's okay, because you can actually write rules that allow you to apply categories and tags later on that allow you to do the additional filtering that you need. So is that helping a little bit more? I think there's okay, there's a clarification. What exactly constitutes a strong term? Okay, great. So a person has asked said I've answered the question. Good, thank you. So there's one question about, are these tools affordable for SMEs too? Well, when it comes to social media monitoring tools, there's a whole range of tools out there. I think generally speaking, what happens is that the cheaper the tool, the more time you might need to spend to get the results that you want. So there are tools out there that you can actually do a lot of this with, and then sometimes they're even free, or they're freemium, or they start on a per-seat basis, and you may pay just a few dollars a month for. So you can actually do some of this stuff. But that just means that you need to have the time to maybe filter the terms more, and maybe you might need to just accept the fact that you're going to maybe get a bit more junk in a new one. So, so you absolutely can do effective horizon scanning, provided you've got the time. So, you know, some of our clients absolutely do not have the time, but they've got budget. So they will say, right, well, you know, it's not really, it doesn't make sense for us to be spending our time on it. It's actually more cost effective for them to get people like us in to help them actually manage this for them. But absolutely, I think that there's a full spectrum. There are over 300 companies out there doing social media monitoring of some form or another, so I'm sure you can find one that suits your budget. Okay, and a question on Twitter. What sort of activity would a joined-up approach to responding to spikes in social media mentions involve? In some organizations, You have a social media team who are the ones in charge of doing the social media monitoring. That may actually be a customer services team, and their job is to actually do kind of the direct replies back when people mention your organization. And sometimes that's all that they do. So when they start doing horizon scanning and they start doing this sort of listening beyond the brand, it maybe needs to involve more than just the people looking at the brand mentions. And again, some organizations, the PR team, don't really get involved in social media, but I'd say for this sort of activity, they absolutely do. So one process that might work well, which I've seen work well with a number of companies, is that you may have a customer services feed. So you can see people mentioning your organization, or you can see people talking about a certain issue, and you feel that you need to get involved in that discussion. But if there's a journalist who mentions it, or there's a high-profile celebrity, or someone else who's a subject matter expert mentions it, you need to use the system to actually take that particular social media post outside of your customer service workflow and feed that through to maybe other people who can deal with it. It might be your PR team, or it could be maybe your analyst relationship, your relations teams, or it could be partner or sponsor. It could be someone else in the business. So just make use of whatever workflow tools you've got and the tool that you've got to allocate certain mentions to people within the business. The key thing is to have one, as much as possible, one ecosystem where all the social media data is held, so you can see that everything's being picked up appropriately. Just one last question. When searching for influencers on Twitter, is there a way to filter them by location, e.g. based in Yorkshire? So with Twitter, we do get some geographic data from Twitter, but again, that's dependent on the person filling in their profile correctly, so that's the time zone that they use. But also when they write in their profile which country or which part of the country they're in. So I suppose yes, we can, but that's dependent on the person making that information available. Facebook, we unfortunately don't get that sort of general information from. You can do very targeted, locational-based advertising on Facebook, but it's not made externally available to people like us. So, and those are kind of the two main platforms we get the location information from. Forums, etc. The location we generally speaking get from the site, the server that's hosting the site. So unfortunately, it doesn't tell us where the individual commentators are from. Great. So if there are any other questions, I think I have missed out on a couple, but feel free to email them to me or tweet them to me afterwards, and I'll be happy to continue the discussion with you then. So I hope that was helpful, and look forward to seeing you in the next session. Bye-bye.